final info for the class. But thank you all for making it through, and yeah, we'll have a fun one. It's a little bit more fun when it's in person because we normally cook a bunch of things for the last class, but we're going to talk about a lot of cool ways. So we're going to talk about harvesting, how to actually harvest things, because I mean that's actually a tough one. You want to be able to harvest things to sometimes to keep things from producing all season long, or you want to harvest things that to get the most production and not to harm the plant if possible. And then we'll talk about I have a section called alternative edibles. Not it's not a marijuana pun, unfortunately, but it's a we're going to talk about all the other things you can eat in the garden that people don't want to throw away, like broccoli stems and weeds and things like that. And then we're going to talk about different cooking techniques for your produce. Just kind of just talk about like the basics of cooking, from like blanching to roasting to making sauces and things like that. Just give like a simple overview, and then we'll talk about food preservation tips, from like how to actually store your food so it lasts long, because majority of food waste does occur in a home, and that so we all need to be better about preserving our food. So we'll talk about that. Have some cool videos on like canning and things like that. And then yeah, that's it. So go ahead and get started. Pull up chats. Pull up the. All right. All right. So let's go ahead and dive into harvesting tips. So we're just going to give you some general harvesting tips, some recommendations on different ways to harvest, particularly on things that you can, like harvest for a while. And it's always unfortunate, like kale. We'll see people harvest, kale. You can harvest kale for months. But I've always seen, I always see people every year pull, as soon as they have the first couple leaves ready, they pull the whole plant out, and that it's such a shame. So we'll talk about different ways to harvest to make it worthwhile. But one thing I want to start out is just talking about maturity. When we say maturing times, we talk about when you can start harvesting a lot of things, and it's good. I mean, these are generalizations. Obviously, there's a lot of varieties out there, and they can change the amount of time it takes. But it's good to have a general sense of things, like when you're planning out the year and you're planning what to plant where, especially if you're doing more in one season. Like if you're doing a spring season and a summer season, you want to be able to squeeze things in certain time periods. So it's good to have a general sense of like things that grow really quickly, like the probably the quickest thing is radishes. Which I don't think I have radishes for. Oh yeah, I have radishes up on the short one. So radishes is always great. I intercrop radishes whenever I grow something big, like cabbages or something. I always intercrop radishes because you can harvest them in like a month before the cabbage gets mature enough to take up the space. And then it's good to have like medium stuff, eggplants and collards and things that can take a couple months. You can decrease this time period by growing it out and potting up in greenhouses or buying big seedlings. And then long-term stuff, and like things like Brussels sprouts. If you're going to do Brussels sprouts, it's good to a lot of people will actually start them in spring, give it a little bit, like a shade cloth or something in the summer, and then they'll harvest them in the fall. So I mean, it could be like big, long, time periods. And like cabbage, some cabbages, if you're going for big head cabbages, can take a long time, but you can also get smaller cabbages as well. They're quicker. And then garlic is we'll talk about garlic too, planting and harvesting garlic. So definitely, I mean, it's just a good idea to have this general sense of as you're mapping out your garden and planning out, when to, you want to know when to harvest things in short and maturity periods to long ones. Um, but yeah, let's go ahead and just kind of dive into it. Probably I always like to start with harvesting greens, because there's a lot of different ways to harvest greens, and you definitely want to be intentional about harvesting greens. And when I say greens, I can talk, I'm talking about like big greens like kale, chard, collards, or like small things like loose leaf lettuces, different mixes, bok choy, lettuce heads, all different kinds of things, and generally like but when we're doing particularly like when you're doing like big leaf stuff like kale and collards and chard, those things you generally want to harvest them a little bit at a time, so you can, and if you do that, if you don't harvest more than like a third of the plant you can harvest that, a couple times a week, or maybe once or twice a week for months, and some people, if you're very intentional, I know some people will plant their kale plants in spring, and if they give it a little bit of shade in the summer, especially when it's really hot, I've seen places that have like, kale plants that are like small trees, by the time and they just harvest it all year. But I mean, most people generally stick with the spring and in the fall, season. But the idea is you want to harvest the big mature leaves first. And so that's with kale, like the new growth is in the middle and the top, same with collards and middle and top. And so you want to go to the bottom, and you just kind of like, like this hand, you just grab it and you snap it back. So kale and collards is super easy just to snap back. You don't want to cut it and leave like a big stump, because that's just going to be wasted energy. It could rot, it could be a vector for diseases and stuff. You just want to snap it back and have a clean cut. And the idea is you don't do more than like a third of that. You don't harvest more than a third of the plant. You can. It's just like you might slow the growth down. But as long as you keep about 2/3 of the plant, or at least a half of the plant, it will continue growing like normal, and you could just keep harvest a bunch once or twice a week. And the idea is you want to eventually make them into like palm trees, where they start, they just get bigger and bigger. And that's nice too, because you get more air and circulation and things like that on the bottom of the plant, once they start getting, mature. So it's easier to kind of, deal with pests and diseases and things. Chard, you can snap chard, but I find it sometimes it's just like takes the plant with it. So I generally like I'll get some sharp pruners, and I'll cut the chard. But chard's very similar. You want to harvest the outside leaves first, and then work your way in inside, and leave about 2/3 of the plant. And then there's a thing called cut and come again, which that means a couple of different things. So this is a really great loose leaf lettuce mix. What they did is they probably dug a trench, and they put a seed probably every like inch or two, or maybe they dumped a whole bunch of seeds and then thinned it out to about an inch or two. And that's nice, because then it grows into a nice, thick, it's like a high density. And a lot of people claim you can actually get more lettuce when you do high density. They won't be as big, but you'll get a lot more smaller leaves. And the idea behind cut and come again is you essentially want to leave the middle inside part of the plant, that's growing more. Because again, with like leaving loose leaf lettuce, it's still growing. Like the middle part is what's growing, and then the leaves, the bigger mature leaves on the outside. So the idea is you kind of grab a handful, you get a really sharp knife, and you just cut. You leave about an inch or two, and then that will actually regrow. And depending on the weather, how hot it is, and when you're doing this, I mean, you can get like 2 to 3 more, regrowths, with that. And sometimes, like, if you have a mild summer, or if you're on the West Coast or something, you can get like 4 or 5. Eventually, like the quality of the lettuce will start decreasing. But that's real great. You just want to make sure you leave like an inch or two. And you can do that the same with like heads. Like this is a bok choy, and most people will pull the whole bok choy out when you're done. And that's nice sometimes, because you want to just, you time it. So, if it's like a spring bok choy, you want to pull it out, right about now. And then you follow up with a, tomato or pepper. But if I want to keep on growing this, instead of pulling the whole thing out, I'm going to cut it at the base and leave about 2 inches. And then the middle is going to keep on growing. And then like within a month or so, it's going to be another, full bok choy, because the root system is still mature. So it will keep on growing. So that's really nice. I definitely recommend cut and come again for as long as you plan on keep on growing, but like I said, like some things, like, I have some lettuces that I'm cut and come again, because I want to kind of grow them all summer and see it until they start bolting. And then I got other lettuce that, rows where I want that to be done so I could plant some tomatoes this week. So I'm just pulling the whole thing out of the ground. So that's when you do the entire head, you can pull the roots out, or you can take a sharp knife and just cut it at the base, and that's really nice too, because it comes out as like a nice head. So it's not like loose, falling apart and stuff. Or, when you come again, like a head, you need a bag, because it's just going to fall apart on you. And then harvesting for thinning, this is a really great idea for like microgreens, or not for microgreens, for like loose leaves. So if I'm like, if you're doing spinach or mesclun mixes or things like that, generally you dig a trench and you just sprinkle the seeds in there. I mean, you can very meticulously put one seed every inch and then let it, high density grow up. But most people will just sprinkle, I mean, who's got like an hour, and then even when you water, sometimes those seeds get flushed away. I've seen people actually using like masking tape or different kinds of horticulture tape where you actually that will degrade in the soil, where they'll put the seeds on the tape and then they'll lay the tape out in this long row, and that way the tape will hold it into place. And that's nice too, but again, that's a lot of time. So the easiest way is just like dig a small trench and then just sprinkle a bunch of seeds in the trench, and as they come up, you want to select especially when they get like an inch or two tall, you want to select the best ones and then thin everything out so it's just one little lettuce head per like inch or two. And then, another way you can do that is you can slowly, instead of just thinning the whole thing at once, you can slowly, thin it out. And then those are actually, considered microgreens. The microgreens are basically like super baby plants that actually have a whole lot of great nutrition because they're using all this like leftover nutrition and nutrients in the seeds, and they're super healthy for you. A lot of people spend a lot of money on microgreens, but you can just do that. So you could just like, thin out like every other day. You just take out, you just thin it out a little bit, not completely. And then they'll start getting bigger and bigger as the more you thin out. And the idea is over like a couple of weeks, you thin them out. So you could have a couple weeks of microgreens. And then when you're done, and you stop once you hit an inch per spacing. And then that's, and that's like and then there's no normal ones. So Allison asked, where does spinach fall? Spinach, you can do a lot of things with spinach. Well, it's different varieties too, but I mean, I'll do the high density with spinach. If I want baby spinach, I'll plant it in like a high dense row and then thin it out to about an inch and then do the cut and come again. But sometimes I'll plant inch. If you plant them farther apart, they'll I mean, it's almost like it's like a nice head. I think there's actually a video I'm going to show that talks a little bit about this, but you can actually cut if you give it enough space, it will form, kind of like a loose head, and then you can just, you could do the large leaf, things where you can cut the outside large leaves, and leave the inside leaves, and they'll just keep on growing over time. So it's kind of like this mixture of cut and come again, and harvesting large leaves. And that's for your typical normal spinach. But then there's like Malabar and summer spinach and all that stuff, which I've actually never grown, but I imagine it's not too far off. But I think Malabar is like more like a viney spinach. So you might have to Google that one. But yeah, I would either do it high density loose leaf, or I would like space it out, whatever spacing it says, like maybe like 3 or 4 inches, and then just harvest the outside big leaves. Maybe take 4 or 5 leaves per plant each harvesting, and then that should last like a month or two. All right. So I think he actually shows a little bit about what you can do on spinach, but I'm going to play this video from the Epic Gardening about cut and come again.
How do we take a field of lettuce just like this and turn it into a bowl of lettuce day after day for pretty much the entire year? We're going to use something called the cut and come again method. There's 2 different ways to do it. We're going to talk about that in today's video. With cut and come again, what you're trying to do is preserve the growing tip of the plant. And for lettuce and many leafy greens, that is in the center, and we call it the crown. And so what you're seeing me do here with this Bibb lettuce, very standard, classic type of lettuce, is come around the outside. And you can do it clockwise, counterclockwise. But what you're trying to do here is take away those large, mature leaves. And I'm doing it here with this Merlot lettuce too, which is more of a frilly variety. This one I'm going to take down pretty considerably just to show you a peek at what the inside really looks like. Because if you do damage the crown, then your plant is done for good. And so you really want to avoid that. You're seeing me take away these outside leaves. And look, there's just very small versions of those leaves in here. So if we dig in, we can see the future of this plant, basically. These are 4, 5, maybe even 6 little leaves that are in development. And in 4 or 5 days, you'll see those really start to come out. And so you can do this with something like spinach too. Come around, Make sure that you're not chopping off that crown. Get around the outside, and you're going to get a lot more yield out of this because you're taking off those mature leaves, letting them grow up, and then doing the same thing. So we can see here, crown is the exact same. Those baby lettuce leaves are coming out. Sorry, those spinach leaves. And now here is a different method. This is a more efficient method. So you can come in with a chef's knife or something similar. Make sure you know right about where the crown is so you don't chop off too much of it. And then grab it like a head of hair almost, and then just come through and slice. And you're going to want a really sharp knife for this. And so you've got a nice bunch of lettuce. You've preserved the crown. We can see I didn't chop the crown off. And there we go. It's really that simple, guys. So the cut and come again method explained in about a minute or two. Well, there we have it. The cut and come again method, very simple, explained. You can get bowls of lettuce day after day using this method as long as you're doing it the right way. But it does bring us to a couple questions. And the first question is, how many times can I actually cut one of these plants before it actually is just done for good? Which is a great question. So usually it really does depend on the type of plant, the type of lettuce or leafy green that you're doing. But for the most part, anywhere from 3 to 5 cuts, and that's about it. So, it's not like the plant's just going to continue producing forever, like it might if you look at my basil video. I have a video on how to prune basil. You can more or less keep it going forever. Relatively speaking, it still will die, but much later than a green. For something like, this loose leaf lettuce right here, you're going to get 3 to 5 cuts before the quality of the leaf is going to start to degrade. It won't be this big, and it also won't taste that good, and it's going to sort of be just a little bit uglier, and just the plant is trying to bolt because it knows that its life is coming to an end, but you're not really giving it the energy and the ability to do so. So then you're in a bad spot.
All right. So that's the cut and come again. So that was like a great example of the spinach, how you normally grow spinach versus like a higher density. But all right. So next part is harvesting broccoli and Brussels sprouts. So Brussels sprouts are like again, Brussels sprouts are definitely not beginner stuff, but they have long grow periods, and like I said, some people even start them in like spring. I mean, you could technically, if you have you big enough seedling, and you start them as early as possible, you could probably get a late spring harvest. But most people will start them in spring, keep them cool over the summer, and then harvest them in the fall. But harvesting, so basically the Brussels sprouts, they grow in these, and they're like basically the armpits of the plant. And these leaves are basically collards. You can pull them off and eat them just like collards. They taste very similar. It's really delicious. So the idea is like once it starts forming, once you start seeing these little Brussels head sprouts, and they start from the bottom, and they start, getting bigger and bigger from the bottom, and they slowly mature to the point where you want to harvest them when they're like 1 or 2 inches. How you see them in the grocery store. You can harvest them younger if you like, but they'll you'll for most Brussels sprouts you'll get a handful a week, and that you harvest on the bottom, and you can speed things up by actually pulling off the bottom collard leaves. So that's actually same thing with collards. You just snap them back, and you want to expose like the bottom half. So the idea is you try to keep the bottom half, make it look like a palm tree. Try to keep the bottom half open, and that's going to give more room for the Brussels sprouts to mature. Same time, you're going to start getting yellow leaves eventually in the bottom, and that's going to be weaker and wasted nutrients. So you want to get rid of those. Anytime you see a yellow leaf, you want to cut that off. But if you cut them off beforehand, you could actually eat the collards while they still taste good, and that's going to be good for circulation. It's going to help mature the Brussels sprouts. It's called pruning a Brussels sprout. So you want to prune it like it's a palm tree, but then like if you don't mind, just a handful a week, especially if you have like a bunch of Brussels sprout plants, a handful a week from like 5 or 10 plants is still a lot. Then you just keep on harvesting them. It'll keep on growing taller. It'll get like 3, 4, 5 feet. I'm gonna just keep on growing until it dies in the winter. Or if it bolts in the hot summer, that's too hot. But if you actually if you want to let's say you're running out of time, like you want to harvest them. Things are, you're trying to do a spring harvest, and next week or next couple of weeks is going to get super hot, and you're afraid it's going to bolt. There's a way where you can actually rush the maturity process, and that's where it's called topping. So that's where you actually chop the top, like 4 to 6 inches, not a whole lot. You just chop the top off, and that's going to actually stop it from continuing growing upward. And then it's going to and so not only is it going to stop growing taller, but it's going to send all its nutrients down to the bottom, and it's going to and over in like a week or two it will mature all the Brussels sprouts pretty evenly. So when you see in the grocery store, when you see like Brussels sprouts that are still on the on the stalk and they're all the same mature side, that's because they chop the tops off, and then they waited about a week or two for everything to mature. So I mean, a lot of production, and this is how they do it in most productions. There's also like this like crazy video. It was on Instagram a little while ago. It was this guy with two machetes that just like just running through Brussels sprouts, like chopping off all the tops, like pretty precise. But that's what they do, so they can mature all for harvest at once. So if you want all, a big feast of Brussels sprouts, you do that. But if you want to just, eat a handful a week from each plant, you would let it continue growing. Um, and then broccoli is pretty great. So broccoli, you get the main head in the middle, and that you essentially you want to wait. You want to get it before it blooms. So each one of these florets is actually a miniature little flower. You want to ideally you want to get it. You wait till each of these florets is about the size of a matchstick. So how it looks at a grocery store essentially. And you want to get it before it starts. Once it starts moving apart, that's a sign where it's going to block. If you see you see space appearing and you see the floret starting to move apart, you want to harvest it as soon as possible, because then it's getting ready to bolt. What's great about broccoli is you cut off the top, and then you get a couple of smaller side heads. So you'll see in a couple of weeks, you don't harvest the whole plant. If you can leave the plant, and then you'll see a couple new floret heads, appear on the bottom of the plant on the sides, and you can get 2 or 3 new ones. They won't be as big, but definitely, if you have the space and the time, leave the plant and you'll get some more. But then also what's great about broccoli is you can eat everything on the broccoli. The leaves are so delicious. They're like a very sweet collard. I think it's better than collards. And we actually had taste tests last year, and most people agree with that. You can eat the stalk. If you peel out the harder outside shell, you can that inside is really tender. You can eat it raw. You can saute it. We're going to show a couple different recipes, like making pesto out of it and stuff. It's got like a nuttier kind of broccoli taste, but I mean, the whole plant is super delicious. But definitely, yeah, when you harvest the top, give it a couple extra weeks, and you'll get some, like I said, you'll get some more bottom ones, appearing. So I'm gonna play this video about Brussels sprouts, talking a little bit about pruning and harvesting.
For caring for the plant. So you can see obviously on this plant, I have a lot of leaves that have these ones have started to decay and they need to be removed. We don't want to let these decaying ones stay in the garden and attract anything or spread anything. So these ones we can just pull off. They're kind of already detaching themselves. I should have got out here a little bit earlier. But you can see some of these bottom ones are beginning to yellow and to turn. So we want to make sure that we are getting those removed as well. So you can take a knife, or you can cut them, or you can kind of pull them off, whatever's going to be easiest for you. And these ones that are already turning, they're really easy to just pull off because they're already dying. And this is also going to provide a little bit more airflow, which is really good because we're in that really rainy season right now. So you can see I've removed a lot of the bottom leaves that we've got here. And so you can see these ones are just about big enough to start harvesting. And a lot of people feel not only do you want to remove the leaves if they're starting to show signs of going yellow, we want to get any of those off of there. But a lot of people feel that by removing these bottom leaves and down here on the bottom, that helps the Brussels sprout plant actually put more of its energy into producing and growing the Brussels sprouts than it does into supporting the leaf growth. And like I said, it also just helps provide a little bit better airflow in here around the bottom, especially when you enter into those fall months where you can get a lot more moisture. And then a lot of people also, as they harvest, the Brussels sprouts from the bottom as they go up, then they'll continue to remove the leaves as they harvest. So after I harvested these, then I would remove a few more of the leaves as we just continue to go up the stalk. And you can see where these ones are pretty good sized and formed. And then if you just come up to the top of the stalk, you'll see how these ones are a lot more smaller and itty bitty, but these will continue to grow and to form well into the coming months, even after we go through those first frosts. Now, this plant is right next to the one that I just showed you. They were planted at the same time, and you can see that this one is not nearly as far along because this is at the bottom of the Brussels sprout, and these are just itty bitty little tiny baby Brussels sprouts. These are nowhere close to being able to harvest like the other one, and this can sometimes happen. There's lots of different reasons. That could be the other one had more nitrogen, even though I had amended all of the soil for whatever reason. So if you are experiencing this and you're getting closer to the end when you should be able to start harvesting, you're like, this has been in the ground for at least 60 to 90 days, and I'm not forming very many Brussels sprouts, or they're really small. You're going to want to remove some of these bottom leaves so that it can put its production to these. So we're going to go ahead and get those. We're just going to go right along, right up next, right underneath where the Brussels sprouts would form there. You can see I still got a little bit of my companion planting to help keep the insects and different pests away of my orange nasturtiums here at the bottom. They're vining out. Let me get those removed. So we've done that, but now there's one more step that we can do to really help force the production of these Brussels sprouts before that first hard frost comes. Because even though this plant will still produce after you get that killing frost and the flavors improved, it does slow down the rate of production and the growth rate once we start to enter into those really cooler days. And of course, then the colder the days we're moving into fall and winter, we have less sunlight. Okay, so on this guy, we have removed those bottom leaves, but this is another trick that you can use to help force it to form Brussels sprouts. Some people will use this to help encourage it to form Brussels sprouts if it's not seeming to form or be as far as long as you think it should be. And another thing is people will do, if they really want to be able to harvest everything at close to the same time, then they'll go through and they will top all of their Brussels sprouts to help force them into production and then to be able to harvest everything at the same time. Now, here in my home environment, I don't want that. I don't want to be harvesting all of my Brussels sprouts from all of my different plants at the same time. I want to just be able to eat off of them fresh as long as possible. But for this guy, because he's so far behind a lot of the other ones, we are going to use this method to help force it to actually produce for me. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove the top. So I've got my knife here, and you're just going to come in, and I'm going to remove about the top, oh goodness, what is this? Probably about the top 3 inches of the stalk. And you're just going to give it a clean cut, and you're going to remove that. And you ideally want to do this at least
All right. So I just wanted to show you that video of how to actually prune it and to top off Brussels sprouts. And she talks more about, I don't know where she lives, but she has a different climate than we do. So we could stop it there. Awesome. Some melons. Melons is definitely a tricky one. Everyone's got their own, whatever about melons, like how, knocking on it if it's hollow, things like that. I could never tell if it's hollow or not. But there are other tricks as well. Coloring is a big one. Like for watermelons, having, if it's laying on the ground, if you're not trellising it, there's going to be a white spot where it lays on the ground. And when that turns, more of a rich, creamy yellow, that's a great indicator that it's getting ripe. Also, on the branch, if you follow the branch, there's this weird little branch that sticks off, and when it starts curling up, supposedly that's also a sign that it's starting to ripen. I actually found this thing on someone shared it on Instagram the other day. I haven't double checked all these things, but it seems pretty good. Good. Talking about when definitely that when it's white, it's less less flavorful as it when the spot is yellow. It talks about webbing and the color and then shiny and things like that. So less shiny the better with watermelon. But honestly, like that's watermelon. There's a lot of different melons out there, and we could probably have a whole class on different types. You really just need to you need to kind of whatever you're growing, do a little research on when it's actually signs it's going to ripen. Some things like cantaloupe, you can actually smell when it starts to ripen. Some cantaloupe, they have that weird webbing, that stays the same color, but then underneath that, it changes color. So sometimes it's color, sometimes you wait for things to fall off vines. Sometimes you just got to calculate, how many days of growth you have, and then do your best, estimated day to harvest. There's always different kinds, but the main thing with that stuff is you want to like harvest and then try one. Don't just like harvest the whole thing, unless you have to. Let's say there's a frost coming, and you wait too long. But harvest one, try it out, and then if it's ripe, go ahead and harvest most of them, or hopefully a lot of these things will ripen at similar times, or at least monitor when they're ready. And then you got eggplant. So eggplants is again, like there's all the different varieties of eggplant. These are like Asian eggplants, the long narrow ones. The more round ones are Italian eggplants, and you have like the more normal, or what we think is normal, the big black ones. So typically eggplant, you want to harvest them. Well, you want to get them when they're shiny. You want to have soft skin, so you want to be able to kind of with your thumbnail, kind of put in make a little indentation when it's ripe. But also you want to kind of understand the size. So a lot of times they'll ripen but they'll when they're half the size of what they could be. So you also want to research, how big are your eggplants are supposed to get. If they're supposed to get 8 inches, let them get 8 inches, even though they may be ripe at 4 or 5 inches, unless you want some baby eggplants. But then you want to be careful not to let them over ripen. And a great sign of overripe is when it loses its shine. So definitely, as soon as it loses its shine, it's just it becomes this woody, kind of bitter thing. So you still want to, harvest it. So don't leave it on your plant. It's just going to suck out nutrients. You want to cut it off, throw it in your compost bin. But you definitely want to use, a sharp knife. Don't pull these things. Some things you could pull off, and other things you definitely want to have a sharp knife, or you're going to damage your plant if you try to pull this stuff off. Beans, peas, potatoes. So again, whatever variety you have, research it a little bit. But well, the thing about peas and beans is like the more you harvest, the more you get. So you want to, stay on top of your game with peas and beans. Like ideally you want to harvest these things, once a day if possible, once they start producing. And like the best way to harvest peas and beans is this little thumb trick, where if you haven't done it yet, it's basically you get your hand like this, and within your other finger stays still. With your thumb, it kind of pushes inward and upward. So it's like you do this little, push, and then it just snaps right off. That way this top part is still there, and that's important, because if you just yank this thing off, it's going to tear the plant, and then that's going to be a damage, and it's got to repair itself, and maybe a vector for diseases and stuff. It could be it's just it's not going to be as productive. But if you do it right, where you leave this whole part, then it's like pruning, where it just stimulates more growth. So the more peas and beans you harvest, the more it'll produce. And then how they're mature, you just kind of have to again research what peas and beans you have. Sometimes you want the whole pod to be completely bursting. Other times you want to get it when you can actually see the peas in there. So you don't want to get too big. Other times you want flat. It's really like you just gotta research what bees and beans what you have, and then kind of go from there. Potatoes. So again, we talked about potatoes. There's all different kinds of seasoned potatoes. If you can get early, potatoes, mid and late season potatoes. So you maybe you plant all of them in spring, but then you either harvest them, like midsummer, late summer, or fall. But ideally, when the potato is ready, basically the leaves on the ground, the top start to die off. So when you start seeing the tops get brown and stuff, ideally, like if you want early, if you're early potatoes and you're going to eat them fresh, go ahead and dig them up. But if if you want to store the potatoes, it's a good idea to leave them in the ground for another week or two. Not if there's going to be a frost. If there's going to be a frost, dig them up because it will damage the potatoes. But if not, go ahead and leave them in the ground for a week or two. It will actually harden the skins, and then you basically just rip off the tops. I mean, the top of it should come off. It might be a couple potatoes attached, and then you want to get you want to be really careful. You want to get either a shovel or if you have one of those garden forks and kind of just kind of loosen up the soil around it and kind of prop it up. And a lot of it's just kind of shoving your hand to the soil and kind of pulling them out. If you've been hilling up, which with normal potatoes you hill them up a lot. The potatoes shouldn't be too deep in the ground. They should be more in the hill. So it's actually a really fun activity for kids to do. It's kind of pulling out the potatoes. And if you have any green potatoes, don't eat those. They'll make you a little sick. That's usually if some part of the potato is exposed to sunlight. I don't really understand the process. I just know it'll make you sick if you eat it. Okra and corn. So okra is another great plant. Like the more you harvest, the more it produces. And it's just like once your okra plant is established, I mean, they can be like 4, 5, 6 feet tall, but once they establish themselves, they just like mass produce okra. So the hardest part about okra is actually getting it before it's overripe. That's basically you want to get it when it's 2 to 4 inches because at that point it's still pretty tender. If it gets bigger than 4 inches, it starts to get woody and hard. So at that point, I mean, some people have some remedies to it, but I don't know. There's not a whole lot you can do except for just save them, and then you can actually harvest the seed. Once they dry up, you can harvest the seeds and plant those next year. But definitely don't leave them on the branch. You want to cut, if you let some overripe, still cut them off and compost them or seed save them. And then corn. Corn's a little tricky. You want to wait till the tassels are brown, and then even at that point, it should be ready. But some people will open up a little bit of it, and with their thumbnail, they'll kind of burst a kernel. And if it's clear juice, it still needs some ripen. And if the juice is somewhat milky, then it's ready to go. And the thing about corn is you only get like 1, maybe 2 ears per plant. So it's like a lot of people don't grow corn unless you have acres, to make it worthwhile. But or if you got cool, like I just planted glass corn. So it's like this multicolored corn. I'm not really looking to feed a lot of people. It's more just like a cool thing to grow, I think. Peppers are very versatile. I mean, you can get certain peppers that are made to be red, made to be green. But a lot of peppers, they change colors over time depending on the ripening. So they all, most peppers will start out, green, or it's a bell, jalapeno, hot peppers and stuff. Typically, I mean, there's lots of exceptions out there, but typically they start out green, and green is more of that savory pepper. And then it turns, either, I always forget, either yellow or orange or some combination of that. So it starts to get a little bit more sweeter or a little bit more hotter if it's a hot pepper. And then it turns red, and red is typically the more sweeter, or it's the more hotter one, depending. Like jalapeno start out green. They're still spicy, but if you leave them on the branch for a little while, they'll start turning some colors. I think they turn red, and then they get even more hotter. Yeah, it's really preference of when you want to get to them, and different tastes. They all have different tastes and different times, so it's really up to you what you want to go for. And use a knife for that, or pruners. Don't pull these off, or you're going to damage the plant, and it's not going to produce as much. Cucumbers the same. I'll say a lot of this stuff is just you want to research, how big they get. And it's a good idea to have like a ruler with you, in the garden, or tape measure, because especially if you're new to this stuff, it's kind of hard to eyeball. What is 6 inches? What's 4 inches? So, but a lot of these things, if you get regular, pepper, cucumber, it's going to be like 6 or 8 inches, maybe longer depending on the variety. Or if you want like pickling cucumbers or dill cucumbers, they may be smaller, like 4 to 6. And the idea is you want to get them when they're still really green and soft. But then when they over ripen, they start getting yellow, and that's at the point where it's not very good. But you still want, again, want to cut it off and throw it in your compost, but don't let it just sit there because it's just going to soak up more nutrients. But yeah, that you want to definitely want to measure, the first couple ones, because they can ripen. Maybe like a regular cucumber will ripen at 6 inches, but if but depending on your variety, you can maybe get an 8 or 10 inch. So you just want to, like I said, do a little research and then, estimate, measure maybe for the first couple harvests, and then from there you can probably eyeball it. And then summer squash and winter squash. So again, lots of different varieties. These are just generalizations, but summer squash typically is more tender. They both, you plant them both at the same time, but summer squash you harvest a lot sooner, and winter squash is typically more like similar to a gourd, where it's harder. I mean, they're not, I think they're maybe in the same family, but winter squash is more like butternut, acorn, spaghetti. They have a harder a rind, and they typically grow like more like vines on the ground. I know they have some new varieties, like I've seen acorn, bush acorns and things like that. So you can find some bush varieties, but typically most are vines. But summer squash, you typically harvest these. Like winter squash, you typically harvest all of them generally in the same time period, like a pumpkin patch. A pumpkin is a winter squash. So that's why you can go out to a pumpkin patch and most of the pumpkins are going to be ready, at the same time. But summer squash, it's like you can harvest it all summer long. And so summer squash is typically, again, you can find vine varieties, but typically they're giant bushes, and they get big. They're like big bushes. Like, you want to give them like 2 feet spacing at least. And then like you can harvest them like crazy, and they usually typically they're done. A lot of people, like production stuff, will have two. They'll harvest them really hard for a month or two and then replant them, because they grow so quickly. But the summer squash, again, take your variety and see what, how long it is, because a lot of stuff like crookneck, if it gets too big, it's not that tasty, so you want to get it while it's a decent size. You want to be able to like kind of break the skin with your thumbnail. Like, I mean, that's typically you want tender stuff for your summer squash, and you want to get it in the right, like you research how long it should be, and then measure it out the first couple times. Like crookneck squash and yellow squash, it's really easy to let it get too big and it starts getting woody. You can still like roast it and cook it, but if you want that really tender summer squash, you got to get it like right, within like 6 or 8 inches, typically. And then winter squash is typically opposite. You want the rinds to actually where you can't break the skin. You want it to have a hard rind where and that, typically, yeah, like I said, you typically harvest, winter squash more in the fall time period. And that can tell, has to do with color, a hard rind, a lot of things. You just want to research it. Research it before. And then harvesting root crops. So root crops can be a little bit difficult for sure to figure out, because you don't see the whole crop. What you're looking for is the top part of the root crop, and that's what's and you're going to judge that when it's ready by the diameter of that carrot or radish. And sometimes hard, like radishes, I don't feel like radishes always pop up, so sometimes it's a guessing game. Like I'm just waiting for, I'll see like the leaves are really big, and then I'll pull it and there'll be a tiny little radish. So it's hard to sometimes tell by the leaves. But most things like carrots and beets, and then some radishes, you'll see the tip tops of the root crop. And ideally you want to get them, depending on the root crops, you don't want to get them, too big. Some things it doesn't matter, like carrots and parsnips, you can keep in the ground, you can let them get big. You can even overwinter them and they'll get sweeter when winter touches them. But like beets, you want to get beets before they get too big, because they'll start getting woody. So like ideal size, you want to, radishes, you can start harvesting radishes within a half-inch top, but then beets, you want to get before they get 3 inches. So you want to get it like a beet, usually around 2 inches diameter, and it's still a pretty tasty beet. And if it gets any bigger, it's going to get woody. And same with like rutabaga and turnips, they're very similar. So you want to just like research the variety you have and how big that diameter would get. But typically most root crops, anywhere from 1 inch to 3 inches diameter. And then how you pull, I mean, sometimes you can pull them out, but sometimes you try to pull them, the whole top snap off. So instead, I would recommend, if you have one of these garden forks or just a shovel, just dig around it. Don't nick it. It's all right if you nick it, but you need to eat it quickly because it's it's not gonna preserve itself very long. If you nick like a potato or a root crop, you want to eat it within a week or two before it starts rotting. But you just want to stick that in the ground, just like lightly prop it up a little bit, loosen the ground, and then they'll come right out of the soil. And then we'll talk more about like tops of things you eat, but like beets and turnips are basically like spinach. They're super high in iron. They're really tasty. You can even harvest them over time. Like beets, sometimes I'll harvest a couple leaves off a plant, maybe once a week. As long as I'm letting them I almost treat it like a loose leaf head of lettuce. And then onions. So I got a whole slide on onions. Onions, I really would recommend. It's a lot of work to direct seed onions, even though if you ask for seeds from seed companies, they always send you onions. Like you literally need to like start your seeds in January in the greenhouse, grow them out, and then plant them out and late, I think like sometime in spring, I believe, and then grow them out and harvest them in its bulbs in the fall. So it's a lot. So it's a lot easier instead to buy them by bunches. Or what they call slips or bunches. And then you could plant them out, dig a trench and plant them, every 6 inches or so. Or bulbs. You can actually plant miniature bulbs. You could buy a whole bag of them for super cheap, and then you let them grow out into. And a lot of times, I mean, like I said, you can get certain varieties that are especially prone, to be like delicious scallions or delicious green onions or delicious bulbs. But a lot of this, whether it's a green onion or a giant bulb, is when you harvest it. If you harvest them, within a month or so, it's also about thinning too. So if you plant like a really dense row, you're going to get more of like spring green onions, which is doesn't have bulbs, but it's more like a garnish. It's still really delicious, but if you want big bulbs, you need to space them out 4 inches or so, and then you have a long growing season. So yeah, like I said, if you want to do spring onions or more mild, more herbal onions, you harvest them, sooner than later, like harvest them probably late spring, early summer. And then if you want the bulbs, you got like, it's like late summer, early fall. And then you basically want to wait again for like the tops to start dying down. And then that's a great time to pull them out. But, and then garlic. So garlic is a very awkward season. You plant it in like October, November. Don't just like use store-bought garlic. You can, but most of the times they're sprayed with something to keep them from ripening, or you just don't know where they come from. So a lot of times I'll either get farmers markets garlic, or I'll order some garlic. But then once I start growing garlic, I'll always save some of the best heads. I'll save for the next year's harvest as well. But then so idea is you don't need to, if you start growing garlic every year, ideally you don't need to ever buy it, even like for seed garlic. But the idea is that you break apart into these little, cloves, you space them out, dig a trench, 2 inches deep, 4 inches apart, you have them face upward, and then you do that in October, November. Sometimes they'll sprout over the winter, sometimes not. You keep it kind of mulched and water every once in a while. And then in the spring, come like late May, early June. So real soon they'll want to bolt and turn to flower. So they'll send up a thing called a garlic scape, which actually is super delicious, mild tasting garlic. It's like a green onion, but it's more like a more garlicky taste. It's really good, like, raw on salads, chopped up or sauteed. But the thing is, you want to get it before, you want to get it before it bolts, and also before it gets woody. So I usually let it do one circle, and then I'll cut it off yeah, at the base. And that is still pretty tender at that point. Usually by the second circle, it starts getting woody. Yeah, they'll do a bunch of circles, and eventually the flower will open up. And at that point, you kind of ruin your garlic because it sends all its nutrients to the flower instead of the garlic. So you want to definitely at least get it before. Yeah, I wouldn't let it, do more than one circle and then harvest that out. Um, and then late June, early July, the bottom halves of the garlic will brown, and that's the point where you can yeah, the top halves will still be green, but when the bottom halves are brown, that's a good point where you want to pull it out. Again, pull one out just to make sure it's still good. It's like it's not. Sometimes like if you overwater and things, it may rot in the ground and stuff. So it's a good idea to like pull one out and just check on it. And then if it looks fine, pull the rest of them out. And then we'll talk about curing the garlic. Yeah, okay. So some plants you need to cure them, and that's a couple of different reasons. One, like a sweet potato. Sweet potatoes aren't sweet when they come out of the ground. They're 100% starchy. So you actually need to turn some of that starch into sugars. And so we have to remember, like sweet potatoes are different than your typical, there's a specific word for your typical your baked potato or your baking potato, whatever. So sweet potatoes are actually a different species. It's actually a tropical plant, so they're used to for like hot humid weather, and that's what they've adapted to actually ripen. So you have to create a similar climate like that, where some people, when they harvest their sweet potatoes, they'll throw keep it, if it's not going to frost out yet, you keep them in the bucket and throw a tarp over it, and that will keep it, when the sun hits down, they'll create a pretty humid environment. A lot of people, like always know, it's sweet potato harvesting time is because they'll have sweet potatoes in the back of that, inside their car, and that little ledge on behind your head in the back of the seat, and the window ledge, in the back of your car. That's a really great humid environment for you to ripen sweet potatoes or to cure them. If you have humidifiers and stuff, you can create some kind of thing in the basement. But if you can't replicate it, a lot of people, it just takes longer. Like if you can create a humid environment, it can ripen in like a week or two, and you can start having some really, eating your sweet potatoes. But I know some people, they'll just keep it in their basement for a couple months, and then it may not be as humid as environment, but eventually it should ripen, or it should start, change the starches to sugars. But again, you want to try one sweet potato before you cook them all, just to make sure that the starches actually turn to sugars. Onions, unless if you're planning on eating your onions right away, or if you're doing green onions, you don't have to worry about curing them. But if you want your onions to kind of last for a while, you need to kind of cure them up. So you cure things for a couple different reasons. One of them to change sugar, starches to sugars, but another one, a reason is to keep is to make them last longer. So onions, a lot of people, they'll to cure your onions, they'll pull them out of the ground, and then they'll kind of sun dry them for a couple of days, and then keep them in a cool area, like in the garage on the table for a couple of weeks. And then basically you want the necks to kind of completely dry up and tighten to the point where you can kind of pull them off or trim them off. But after a couple of weeks, they'll develop a hard enough shell or outside rind where they should last a long time. And same with garlic. You can eat garlic right away, but if you want it to last a while, especially if you're planning on replanting some of that garlic next year, you want to cure it, which is basically just like hanging them in like a shed or in a garage, and you just kind of air dry them, for a couple weeks, and that just toughens them up to the point where they'll last a really long time. And then sometimes tomatoes. So tomatoes are great. I mean, the tomatoes will grow to basically there's a frost and then dies. But the problem is the sunlight. As the sunlight decreases, as the temperatures, like they like. I mean, a lot of tomatoes will ripen only when it's like in like the 80s and humid or something. That's when they like to ripen. So as the temperature starts dropping, and as the sunlight starts dropping, you're going to find yourself with lots of tomatoes, green tomatoes, and not too many red tomatoes. And it's going to take longer and longer for them to ripen. Especially if you're looking at your forecast and you got it's plant full of green tomatoes and there's a frost coming, you may want to rush the ripeness So one way to do that is kind of just pull the whole tomato plant up and then just kind of hang it upside down. I don't know if you have to hang it upside down, but basically pull the tomato up, out, and then that's going to freak the plant out. It's going to realize it's dying, so it's going to want to rush all its nutrients to these tomatoes, hopefully to ripen them, to keep the seeds going. So that's one way to kind of ripen your tomatoes. If you don't like green tomatoes, I'll actually show you some really great green tomato recipes later in this presentation. Then we talked already a little bit about this, but pruning your herbs. A lot of times you want to harvest your herbs like you want to prune them. So you're doing like a 2-for-1, and you prune your herbs basically to create better structure. If you just plant one basil seed into the ground, you're going to have one branch that's going to go up. It's going to have a handful of leaves, and then it's going to flower, and you're not going to get a whole lot of basil leaves. But if you, I usually wait till after like the second round of leaves, I'll start pruning them, which is basically I'll snap it, right below or right above the intersection of two leaves. And if you look really closely, there's little bumps in the armpits, kind of like the Brussels sprouts. But when I snap this, those become the next branches. So then they start, leafing out, and then all of a sudden you have 2 branches full of basil leaves. And if you do that on those 2 branches, and you keep on doing that, then it's all of a sudden you have 4 branches, and then you have 8 branches and 16 branches, and all of a sudden you have a basil bush that's full of like an enormous amount of basil instead of just a single branch. So you can do that with a lot of your really soft, herbs, like especially mints and things like that, and lemon balms and stuff. You could, yeah. The more you do that, and I even do that on seedlings. If my basil is getting too tall in my greenhouse, I'll pluck the tops off just to kind of start that bush-like structure. And then for your perennial and your hardier herbs like rosemary and thyme and stuff, you basically want to you're pruning these. You're basically pruning these branches off because the branches are more woody than like a soft or herbaceous like herb. So that you basically like this is rosemary. So let's say you basically just want to cut at the not at the base but close to the base of each one of these branches, because the idea is if you leave like a third of the branch, that branch is going to regrow and may even grow bushier. And as long as the general idea is you don't want to over harvest it. You don't want to like cut more than a third of the plant. You want to leave at least a third of the plant and at least a third of each branch that you cut off, and then it's going to keep on rebouncing. So the main thing about perennial herbs and woody herbs is you just don't want to harvest too much, because then it may not come back. But the more the more you prune it and the more you cut it, it's like stimulates the growth. So the more it'll start growing. All right, so the next section is alternative edibles. I really love this section because it's basically like full of all kinds of fun things to eat that most people just throw away. But yeah, there's a whole list of from root crops, the blossoms, the stems, the leaves, to different things, garden weeds and things like that. But yeah, we'll start out root crop tops. So most root crops you can eat. Some of them are more delicious than others. Beet greens are some of the best root crops. So you can, like I said, you can harvest 1 or 2 leaves every once, like maybe once a week, as long as it's reproducing leaves. You just don't want to over harvest, because then that's what's feeding and creating your beets. Or if you want beets as quickly as possible, I probably wouldn't harvest any of it. And then when you pull that stuff out, eventually you want to chop these leaves off. So then you can cook them. It's basically spinach. So you can eat them however you eat spinach. You can cook them. You can eat them raw. Things like that. You can the stems. You can soften the stalks. By cooking them down a little bit. I'm actually going to show you. There's a hummus recipe where if you switch chickpeas with chard or beet stalks and you simmer them down, it makes like the creamiest, most delicious hummus. I'll show you the recipe in a second. And turnip greens. So you got turnip greens and radishes, or turnips are more mustardy like. Radishes are pretty spicy. A lot of radishes, though, they have prickly varieties, so you can cook those down if they're prickly. If you saute them, they'll be fine. And then carrots and parsnips, it's acquired taste. They're pretty bitter. You can blanch them or saute them. Blanching, we'll talk about that in a second, but that's like you throw into like a hot pot of water for like a minute, and then you throw into ice water, and that softens things. It preserves a lot of taste and taste and things and color and things like that. Or you can just, like, easiest way is just use them for soups and broths and things like that. Yeah, I know, like, I mean, beets are really delicious. Radishes and turnips are more required. Some people like them, and then like probably less and less people like carrots. But they're great with, like I said, like in soups and broths. They're pretty fantastic. So this is a recipe for a carrot top and celery leaf pesto. So I got a whole bunch of recipes in this section because these aren't typical recipes that you could probably Google, or you probably could, but I just have a whole bunch of them. You could try things out. This is a really delicious recipe. Same with sauteed beet greens, salad, really delicious. And then blossoms. So one of the best blossoms are squash blossoms. So we talked about this in one of the first classes, where the female squash plants have the bulbs or the ovaries and the bottom. That's where the fruit develops, but the males don't. And a lot of times, squash, you have bad pollination. That's why people, if you're going to grow squash, you need to plant a couple of them, because a lot of times, female plants flowers will open, but the males will be closed, and then vice versa. So, but if you notice, like when a bunch of female flowers are opening, you want to cut off a male flower, rip off of petals, and then stick the pollen into each one of the female flowers, and that will give you basically you'll have full pollination. And at that point, you can wait. Sometimes you'll have more female flowers and stuff, but from generally you can harvest most of your male. As long as you've pollinated all the female flowers, you can usually harvest most. It's a good idea to leave one or two just in case you need them later, but you can harvest most of the male flowers. And then those are super delicious. I love to, like, there's one recipe where you stuff them full of ricotta cheese, you bake them, and then drizzle honey on them. You could fry them as like fritters and tacos and quesadillas, make hush puppies and stuff out of them. Really, really delicious. Definitely, I recommend a lot of different, yeah. And then garlic scapes, again, we talked earlier about that. That's the garlic trying to blossom. So, wait till it makes one circle, cut it out, and then you can, cook it up, eat it raw, mildly, it's a mildly tasting garlic. Borage is a great, cool weather flower, I believe. It's real beautiful, purplish blue. But if you could pull the petals, and it's super sweet. It's like this floral, sweet taste. It works really well in salads and pastries and things like that. And then marigolds, you can actually pop those off, and you can fry them up as fritters and things like that. Different varieties, some of them taste, peppery, spicy, tangy, depending on the variety. So Deborah says kohlrabi leaves are edible too, saute or in soup. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I don't have kohlrabi. That's great. Because I imagine it tastes kind of like maybe like a cabbagey kind of thing. All right, and then blossoms. There's a whole bunch of other blossoms you can eat. Violets and pansies are really delicious. Put in salads or decorative for pastries, things like that. Rose petals, all this stuff you can eat. They all have, depending on the variety, they have different tastes and things like that. Rose hips. So if you have some roses, definitely want to get the rose hips. So typically when a rose is done, throughout the year, you deadhead them, which is basically you cut off the flower, so then it stops sending nutrients, and it'll send nutrients and to produce more flowers. But up until once it gets like fall, I recommend stop deadheading and just let the flowers just kind of the petals rot off and just do their thing. The petals will rot off, and then you'll have these little red balls. And then you usually want to wait. Usually after the first frost, you want to get to the point where you can actually squeeze them, where you can actually, like, if you squeeze one of the berries, it'll be like a custardy stuff inside that will kind of squeeze out. Not to get disgusting, but it's kind of like when you like pop, you can, if you've seen videos of it, you can pop, it's like, it looks like you're popping a zit. But it's basically, it's like really, delicious custard, in there. And you can eat them straight up. You can, but a lot of people will make jellies and teas and things out of them because what's great is it's super high in vitamin C, and it's like it's right, and you can harvest it right when the winter is coming. So it's a great way to kind of like stay healthy over the winter. And then nasturtiums, really, you can eat the leaves or the flowers. They're very spicy. I wouldn't make a whole salad in nasturtiums, but you can mix it up with a normal salad. It's really good. Yeah, Deborah says that kohlrabi leaves are a bit cabbagey, but with more of a bite. Yeah, I love kohlrabi for sure. Thank you. More blossoms. So one of the things we've been giving out, and so I have a bunch of kale plants from last fall that I kept in, even though the kale was kind of done, but it was kept on sending up these. This is a kale flower, and it would send up a couple of them a week, and if you cut them off, it's actually this really delicious broccoli rabe. So you can saute it, add butter, garlic, and things like that. Or you can just eat it fresh. I love it fresh. It's like a less bitter broccoli rabe, and so we've been harvesting every week. I've been harvesting kale flower. We've probably harvested about 10 pounds of bolted kale blossoms from maybe 10 or 20 kale plants from the fall, and we've just been giving them away in the produce giveaways. People love them. Yeah, they're really delicious, and you can do that with most brassicas. Kale is definitely the best, but collards and you can do that with arugula. It's a very peppery bolting flower. Chives as well. Chives, you can the tops you can cut off the flowers, and you can actually batter them. You can saute them, make fritters and stuff. And then this is actually a tree, but this is a tree you can find everywhere. If you, red buds are all over the city. They're beautiful trees. They have these beautiful floral flowers that blossom sometime in spring, usually around Easter. And if you pull them out, it's actually a very sweet floral taste. They're delicious. I'll eat them, raw. I'll just pull off handfuls from trees. But I usually it used to be, I feel like, climate's changing, but I used to always make a red bud salad for Easter. I would pull off a bunch and mix it with greens, and it's real delicious. But I feel like it's lately, it's blossoming after Easter lately. And a lot of people will bake with it. It's they'll make cakes and stuff with it. It adds an extra little sweetness to it. And there's a couple more recipes: squash blossom frittata, and then stalks and stems. So there's a lot of stalks and a lot of this stuff gets thrown away. Like broccoli, my 4-year-old actually loves the stalks more than the actual flowers or the florets. But with a broccoli stem, like I said, you can peel the outside rough layer and you can just eat it raw. It's like a nutty broccoli taste, or you could saute them, fry them, pickle them. I'm going to show you some pictures of some pickled broccoli stalks. They're real delicious. And then chard stalks are very similar to beet stalks, where you can actually, if you rip off the leaf part and with the stalks, you can do, again, you can pickle them and cook them and things like that. But I want to have a recipe where this is, I'll boil them for a while, soften them up, and then blend them, and then make a hummus where I basically substitute the stalks for chickpeas. And we used to make this in class, and most people will say it's the most delicious hummus they ever had. It's just such a it's so much more creamier. Which is hard to say because hummus is already very creamy, but it's really good hummus. I'll show you a recipe in a second. And then fennels, you can eat, a whole part of fennels, the fronds, the stalks, everything. You can eat it, you can fry it, you can make broths out of it. So this is a chard stalk hummus. Definitely recommend if you're cooking, if you're growing chard, definitely try this recipe out. This is one of my favorite recipes in this class. And then broccoli stalk pesto is really good as well. It's more of it has this broccoli nutty taste to it. Yeah, I love broccoli stalks as well. And then leaves. There's a whole bunch of leaves out there that you can eat. We already talked about Brussels sprouts, are basically collard leaves. sweet potato leaves. Actually, you can harvest a lot. You can eat these. They're like spinach leaves. You can cut a little bit at a time as long as it's still growing and still getting. As long as it's getting bigger and bigger every week, you can cut a little bit off and saute it. Or when you actually harvest all your sweet potatoes, you can still eat. As long as you get to them before frost. Because it's a tropical plant. Once it frosts, everything's going to die. You want to harvest sweet potatoes way before it frosts, and then you can harvest all the leaves and you can cook them all up like spinach. Broccoli leaves again are very sweet collards. We did some taste tests last year, and people actually preferred them over like collard. People that love collards actually preferred broccoli over collards. It was even more sweeter. And then cauliflower leaves as well are like very similar to cabbage, are good roasted. And then there's the trick: if you ever harvest them, you want to harvest greens on the cool part of the day. You're in the early morning or late afternoon, but you have to harvest them in midday, and they wilt. Throw them in some ice water, and they'll pucker back up. Just for like a couple hours though. So you got to do that, and then dry them off and eat. But you got to eat them really quickly. And then pea shoots. So when people say pea shoots, they're basically talking about like the stems and leaves of peas. So peas, grow like they have these, double leaves and then stem, double leaves, stem. And some people will grow them just for pea shoots. Pea shoots are like they're basically like leaves that taste like peas, but they're a little bit more nuttier. They're more tender. They're really delicious. The thing is you can't, some people will have like peas that they harvest just for the pea shoots, and some people will have peas they harvest for the pods. It's hard to do both. If you do, because the more you harvest, more shoots you harvest, the less pods you're going to get. So it's really up to you. Well, a lot of people will do it like microgreens as well, where they'll just like cover a whole tray full of pea seeds, and they'll grow really small, high dense peas, and then and they'll just keep on harvesting them and let them grow back. But typically, yeah, you want to wait till the peas are somewhat established, and then you want to cut. Once they're about 8 inches tall, you want to basically cut off 2 sets of leaves. About 2 to 4 inch section, and you do that for each branch. And then you can eat them fresh, throw them in salads, saute them, all different kinds of things. But you want to leave a decent amount of the plant so it keeps on growing, so you can keep on harvesting, so you can get a good harvest, once or twice a week. I'm actually going to show you a real quick video on how to do this.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this flourishing jungle of spring peas we have in front of you here. As most of you know, we're growing these peas for pea shoots, and we are going to show you how to harvest those pea shoots. So it's pretty easy. One thing to note about this plant is if we harvest these pea shoots too low, they're gonna be pretty woody, and they're not gonna be very palatable. So it's just important to stay within that top 2 or 3 inches of the plant. So we're just gonna pick a plant right here. And one way to do that is just to pinch it off if you have clean hands. The other way is with a pair of clean sanitized scissors. And I'm just going to chop this off right about here. This will grow again, and you can get numerous harvests off this plant. But if you see there, I have about maybe a 3.5 inch piece of pea topping right there. And this is the part that is edible that you can put right into your little harvest bowl that I brought out with me. We'll throw that in a salad spinner inside, dry those off, rinse those off, and those will be good to go. Pretty easy to harvest those pea shoots. Really delicious, easy to grow, fun stuff. So happy harvesting.
All right. So nice little short video. So I select most of these videos. I try to get the shortest ones that make at least a little bit of sense. So that was a great short to the point. Here's some sauteed sweet potato green recipes, roasted cauliflower, broccoli leaf recipes. We used to do this one in class. That was really good. And then seeds. So there's a lot of seeds out there that you can eat. Nasturtiums. Actually, if you let the whole flower go, and it'll create this little seed. And you can actually pickle them, and they call them, I think, like the poor man's capers, the poor man's capers. So they taste very similar to like capers if you're into capers. cilantro seeds are basically coriander. You can, wait till they, let, it all dry out, the flower head, and it's just, seed pods left over, cut it off, put it in a paper bag, and kind of just let it, shake it once a week and just wait until all the seeds drop out. And then, yeah, you can grind it up and that's, or eat it, and that's basically coriander, if you like coriander spice. Very similar to mustard. You can do the same thing, wait till the pods dry off, throw it in the bag, let it all, fall out. And then mustard, you grind it up, and then people do like ferment it or do different things to create the actual mustard sauce, but if you just want the mustard spice, you can just grind it up. Same with like fennel, the pollen on fennel. A lot of people will use that as different spices. So here's a recipe for the poor man's capers from nasturtium seeds, pickled. Rinds as well. Pickled watermelon rinds, especially like if you spice it just well. Like a lot of pickling, it's I like it. It depends on how they make it and what kind of spices and stuff. This is a really pretty awesome. It's got some crystallized ginger, allspice berries, and these. It's a really delicious watermelon recipe. Pickled watermelon. You can pickle broccoli stalks, chard stalks. And then green tomatoes. So again, like I said, especially around like October, November, it's really hard for tomatoes to start, continue to ripen. You can try that ripen Russian, if you cut the whole plant out. I mean, you're basically killing your plant, but if you're kind of done, or if you need to move on, do a cover crop or something, you can do that. But if you want to just eat the green tomatoes, a lot of people, fried green tomatoes is that big popular one. That's delicious, but there's a lot of other really great green tomato recipes, from chutneys to salsas. I have a friend that used to work at that organization, Brain Food. Unfortunately, not around anymore, but they did all kinds of cooking recipes, and they would make green tomato muffins, because it's really great when you bake with things like moist things. It adds moisture, so the muffin is extra moist. And yeah, it's really, yeah, green tomato muffins are pretty amazing. And then broth. So then if you got all these things that you're cutting, like from onion peels to broccoli stems to shavings of carrots, save all that, put it in a bag in the freezer, and then when you're ready, just cook it all down into a broth. It's a great way to make some awesome vegetable broth, and that way you don't have to waste any part of the plant. And then there's all kinds of really delicious edible weeds. And what's crazy is these things have more, some of these things have more nutrition than anything you can grow in your garden, like kale, collards and stuff, especially like purslane. So actually, like some of this started growing in our seedlings trays, and I transplanted it in my garden. I love it. It's like a succulent, but it's got the highest omega fatty acids of any plant that I know of, at least. It's really healthy for you. I don't think it's very vigorous. I mean, it's pretty easy to pull if it ever gets it spreads like too much. But it's basically like a succulent. You can pull off the leaves and mix it in salads, eat it, saute it, things like that. Dandelion, if you can tolerate the bitterness, if you can get them before they bloom, like in the spring, they're a lot less bitter. But you'll actually see, like, that Yes Market, they sell dandelion leaves. And it's like $5 a bundle. So you can harvest this stuff. Just when you're harvesting these things, like especially dandelion, if it's from your garden, great. But if it's from a yard, you just want to make sure it hasn't been peed on by a dog or something like that. So just be a little cautious if you're harvesting this stuff in like a park. But you pull it out, the leaves you can eat, and then there's like the root part. If you pull off all the leaves and trim off the roots, there's this meaty part right here that you can saute and stuff. It's really good. It's just like I said, it's bitter. It gets more bitter throughout the year, so you want to try to get them when they're young in the spring. It's like less bitter. Or if you can also like there's ways to like kind of wash out the tannins and stuff and the bitterness. There's different techniques you can look up. Lamb's quarter, this stuff grows like crazy. It's basically like a really nutritious spinach. You can cook it, you can eat it raw. Dead nettle, if you ever see like that sea of purple, that's dead nettle. Not to confuse with stinging nettle. Stinging nettle, you want to wear gloves if you harvest that stuff. And a lot of people do harvest stinging nettle because it's very, they make some really amazing nutritious teas and stuff, like really high in vitamin C and stuff. But I don't really mess with that stuff. But dead nettle is you don't need gloves. So it's pretty easy to harvest. You make pestos and salads and stuff, and same with chickweed. I had a chickweed pesto once. A lot of people love it. It's a little too like I thought it was it's kind of got a grassy little taste to it, but definitely you can eat, all this stuff is super nutritious. It's got way more nutrition than anything you can grow in your garden. And we actually have a intro to urban foraging in DC. We did a class, a recording you can watch on Doug Network, where we talk about all the, we go month by month, talk about all the things that you can harvest in the forest, from berries to roots and to all different, easy mushrooms and stuff. But we also talk in the garden, all the things you could forage in your garden as well. So if you want to learn more about that, definitely check out that video. And then when in doubt, just throw things in the blender, add a little bit, like add an apple or some apple juice, and everything tastes wonderful. So here's a couple recipes for some green smoothies. Yeah. All right, so now we're going to talk about some like basic cooking and techniques, about your garden veggies. That some of it may seem obvious, but some of it's not, and it took me a while to kind of figure out. So, and we'll talk about some recipes as well. But washing your greens is definitely something you want to do. I definitely recommend investing into a salad spinner. You can't, if you're growing your veggies, they're just going to be caked in dust, or not dust, but like dirt and sometimes slugs and things like that. So, it's nice to like chop it all up, throw it in this. What a spinner is basically like a big plastic bowl, but then there's like a colander, plastic bowl inside that, and you fill it completely up with water, and then you lift the inside bowl out, let it drain, kind of like, with your hands, swirl it around, wash it. And then you drain it all, and then you put it back into this thing, and it's got this top that you press down, and it spins. And what it does is it spins all the lettuces, and all the water gets spinned out, and it hits the second bowl, and then deposits on the bottom. And that's, especially if you're going to grow a lot of greens, it's worth buying one of these for like $10. You can wash your greens in like 5 minutes, or also you can also just like wash them in some cold bucket or colander of water. You can wash it. It's nice to kind of let it soak a little bit, and then but you want to dry it, because if you don't dry your greens with a spinner, or dry it, put it in some paper towels and stuff, it's going to start rotting really quickly. So, and then you want to store it in a sealed plastic bag, or container in the fridge. And yeah, again, it's only going to last about a week or so. So you want to, use it as quickly as possible. And then kale. So kale, a lot of people, upsets a lot of people's stomach. It's a really tough, fibrous kind of leaf. So one way to kind of make it a lot easier to digest is massaging it. So this is actually like you would rip off the stems. So you want to remove the stems, and then with the leaves, you actually you want to gently, you put some like olive oil, some salt, some things like that will actually kind of help break things down a little bit, the structure, and then you just kind of massage it. Like knead it like you're kneading some dough, not, you don't want to pulverize it, but just like, get in there and massage it for a couple minutes, and that's going to that's definitely going to break things down. It breaks the outside structures to the point where it's more like a tender leaf at that point, and it's less likely to upset your stomach. And there's also no massage alternatives, like letting them just soak in olive oil and lemon, and that will like break down the outside and tenderize them overnight. Saute greens, definitely, like a lot of things like kale and Swiss chard and spinach. A lot of people can't eat them raw. Like they'll, collards, they'll really upset your stomach. So you definitely want to, get some recipes on sauteing, chopping them up, and cooking them down. There's a thing called oxalic acid. It's in most like really heavy leafy greens. If you eat too much, it does upset your stomach. So, like sauteing them will actually cook it and break that stuff down and make it a lot easier to absorb. You just want to, find some good, like a really good healthy fatty, like olive oil is one of the best oils to use when sauteing them. And then add, herbs and aromatics and things. Sometimes it's like more like, you can kind of add the herbs first in the oil and kind of like infuse the oil a little bit and then saute it, more like a stir fry. Um, yeah, definitely, yeah, I would, get in the habit of that. Roasting. So roasting, I am like, I feel like in the last couple of years, I've just been blown away by the wonderful world of roasting. If you're not into roasting, you should definitely roast things. So roasting is like a high heat, cooking something in the oven on like 400 to 500 degrees, so really high heat. Sometimes you can slow roast things as well, on a low heat for several hours. But most things, if you're cooking it like 500 degrees, you're typically only cooking it for like 10 or 15 minutes, and that can be like kale chips, root vegetables, are amazing roasted, like carrots and beets and radishes are so good. Radishes are really great roasted. I've been doing this cabbage roast where you cut it in wedges and kind of drizzle olive oil and stuff on it and some lemon juice and roast it for a while, and it's so amazing. It's like the best thing ever. And cauliflower, my kid, my 4-year-old hates. He's such a picky eater, but he loves roasted cauliflower, especially sprinkle like some olive oil and some fennel seeds, and just roast it for like 30 or 40 minutes, and it's amazing. And like you can butter or you can grease the like a cookie tray, or if you do a lot of roasting and you don't like cleaning, I definitely suggest investing in parchment paper. You can actually just put like this piece of paper on that you attach to the bottom, and it doesn't stick to anything and doesn't burn in the oven. It's pretty great if you don't like, because it could get, roasting can get kind of messy cleaning. So definitely recommend parchment paper when you're doing this stuff. And then like, broccoli, roasting broccoli florets, cauliflower, squash, especially like butternut and acorn. You can go, savory with olive oil. You just want to scoop out the, cut in half, scoop out the innards, and then you put olive oil and stuff, or sweet like brown sugar and butter, and roast it. One thing I just added, I was on this huge kick last year, slow roasting. I found some, like, it was like New York Times. It was like a tomato pesto recipe. I couldn't find it. I really wanted to post it. I'll keep on looking for it. But this is a picture. Basically, you just slow roast tomatoes and like eggplants, and you could do garlic and onion. You just slow roast it for like 3 or 4 hours at like 200 degrees temperature. Cover it with some olive oil and some salt and things like that. And then when it's done roasting, when it just smells amazing, blend it all up, and then it's just this awesome like tomato pesto, or I'll add walnuts and stuff to it and make it like a dip out of it. But there's just like, like roasting, there's a whole world of like roasting to make like sauces and dips and things like that. But definitely recommend doing this. And like the meatier tomatoes, like that's why the Roma tomatoes and stuff are really great, are better at roasting and better at I'll show you how to make a tomato sauce in a second, but you can still do it with like a juicy tomato. It just gets it's more juicy and you get less of the meat that you want for the sauce. But yeah, I definitely recommend. It's amazing. Just look up some slow roasting tomato and eggplants, and you can make like if you want to make like baba ganoush with eggplants, that's kind of it's a very similar slow roast where you actually kind of burn the outsides of the eggplant and stuff, and it's just, yeah, I'm telling you, like roasting is a wonderful world. Veggie noodles. So if you're growing spaghetti squash, I love spaghetti squash. It's a great alternative, especially if you're looking for like a gluten-free alternative and you don't really like the other alternatives. Just you can cook a spaghetti squash. It looks like inside of a pumpkin. But when you cook it, I usually cut it in half and I'll roast it and put some olive oil and stuff, inside of it, and then I roast it for a while. at a high heat, and then you pull it out and you can just take a spoon and you just like pull out the insides, and it's like this amazing, it's not quite a spaghetti, but it's pretty close to like a spaghetti, kind of like an angel hair. And then I'll add like, just like tomato sauce and Parmesan and or whatever, and just do what you normally do with a pasta. Really healthy alternative to like a wheat pasta. And then you can also get spiralizers, and you can make zucchini and like yellow squash noodles as well if you're looking for another healthy alternative to pasta. Shredding vegetables, definitely think about shredding like zucchinis and cucumbers and cabbages and things like that. Great for salads, for tacos, for it's really great for baking. It's very similar to like tomato, adding like the green tomato, that's what, like when people make like carrot cake and stuff, why it's like so moist is because like the vegetables, the shredded, you shred carrots, and it kind of helps seal in the moisture, like it adds moisture to whatever you bake, and it's great. Like zucchini bread, that's why zucchini bread's so moist, is from that. So definitely like coleslaw, garnishes, all that stuff, really great. Then stir fries. Okay, so we got 25 minutes left. Okay, so stir fries. So it's basically the difference between stir fry and sautéing is basically stir fry is a much higher heat. So you don't want to use like when you're sautéing things, you want to use like olive oils or some fatty oils. But when you're stir frying, you want to find like oils that like corn or canola that can handle a really high heat. And the idea is you want to chop everything at once. You get the oils going, you add aromas, chilies, garlics, whatever, to get your special taste, and then you throw your veggies in there and saute it up really quickly. You keep it moving, as much as possible so you're not burning it. It's a whole, it's a whole thing. But definitely, great thing to for your veggies. Making tomato sauces. So there's a lot of different ways. Like we talked about, different ways of roasting tomatoes to make tomato sauces, but you can also, in a more traditional way, is when you blanch them. And we'll talk about blanching in a second, but it's basically, I would take these tomatoes, again, like the meatier ones are better, like Romas and stuff, or the less juicy ones are better. But you would make a little X like here. I'll cut out the top, and then I'll boil them for a couple minutes, and then I'll throw them in ice water. And what that does is it separates the skin from the tomato. So you can, but with your hand, you can just easily pull off the skins, because no one really wants the skins in their sauce. Then you throw that in a blender, blend it up, and then you can cook it, or you can add whatever you want, ingredients, basil, garlic, things like that, olive oil, lemon juice, and that's a great way to make your own tomato sauce. Blanching. So when we say blanching, it basically what that means is you throw something in some hot water for a couple minutes and then throw it in ice water, and it does a couple different things. So one, it can help remove your tomato skins, or if you're making a peach cobbler or something, it can help remove the peach skins and things like that. But it also can help preserve your food if you're about to freeze it, or if you're about to can something. It can help. It breaks down the enzymes that normally start rotting your food, so it can preserve like tastes and textures and colors and things. Like asparagus, a lot of people will blanch asparagus because especially if they're going to store it for a while, because it'll remain much greener and more delicious looking than unblanched. There's a whole lot. I mean, you'll see this if you get into big in cooking, you'll see blanching a lot, and this is basically what they mean when blanching. All right, in our last section is we're going to talk about some food preservation tips. All right, so again, I was mentioning I work a lot on food recovery and food waste, and they do a lot of studies, and like 30%, give or take, is of our food we grow ends up in the dump, and a huge part of that is in their households. Because a lot of times we don't store things correctly, and they end up rotting before we have a chance to use them. So it's worthwhile to kind of spend some time, even if you're growing food or you're buying like veggies and fruits from, spend a little bit of time just figuring out, should I which fruits are best on your counter, which ones are best in your refrigerator, which ones are best in your freezer, should I wash things, should I not wash them? So definitely spend a little time like that. There's a couple great charts on this stuff, but Yeah, typically, I mean, a couple of quick tips. One is like, look at how the grocery store is maintaining your veggies and fruits, and kind of mimic that. Like if it's like in a cool area, then you definitely want to keep in the refrigerator. But if it's in a normal area, then maybe you can keep it on your counter. But you want to, most things you don't want to wash. You want to wash lettuce, and dry it, and then stick it in the freezer bag, in the a plastic bag in the refrigerator. But that's about it. Most things you don't want to wash until you're ready to eat them, because that way, when you wash things, a lot of times you could increase the spoilage. So you want to kind of keep it in its skin, especially in its grime, like an apple or something, and then wash it right before you eat it. Um, unless you're going to stick it in the fridge. If you're going to want, if things that you stick in the fridges, like strawberries and stuff, you can wash and then stick it in the fridge. But if you're going to, anything on the counter, you don't want to wash it until you're ready to eat. And you like remove rubber bands. Like if you got carrots, even though it looks all cool, you got a bundle of carrots with the tops on it. You want to cut off the leafy parts, because those are going to rot first. And if they rot first, then they're going to start rotting your actual carrots. You want to look at which things go on the countertops, like most fruits and avocados and tomatoes and mangoes. Like you don't want to put a tomato in the fridge. One, it doesn't do very well, and plus it releases a lot of that gas that ripens things, and it's going to over ripen stuff. So you actually want to like separate, like especially in your fridge, you want to have one section for your veggies, and another section for your fruit. That's a lot of times why they have those drawers. You can't keep them separate, so because different things ripen at different times, and they can affect other things that are around them. So you want to keep fruits and vegetables separate, and then you want to, this is a great guide on things you want to keep on the counter, because they're going to slowly ripen. And then these things are, you can keep in the refrigerator, as well. But also, like if you buy a whole bunch of apples, apples are, if you buy a couple apples, keep them on your counter, they're going to ripen. But if you buy a whole bunch of apples and you're not going to eat them, anytime soon, stick them in the refrigerator, so they can store better. But there's a whole bunch of different things, you can store unwashed, store things in paper bags, mushrooms and stuff. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but yeah, definitely. Yeah, spend some time, researching how the best way to keep your stuff as long as possible. And then same with freezing too, spend some, this is a great chart that shows how to freeze things. And one of the reasons why you want to freeze things is you can keep things for a really long time. Problem with freezing things is it never really comes out, it loses texture. That's why a lot of people will blanch it first, so it won't lose the taste, because sometimes it'll lose taste. But that's why a lot of times if you're freezing, fruits, you use them for smoothies and things like that. Like I wouldn't eat like frozen strawberries thawed, because they're going to be kind of messy. And if if you want to defrost things, stick them in the refrigerator. Don't just leave them on the counter, because they'll fall out too quickly. But definitely when you're freezing things, wash, trim, cut. You could, if you can, blanch certain things. Stick them in plastic bags. Keep them as sealed as possible. You don't want that much airspace in your freezer. Certain things, like basil and stuff, actually freezes really well in olive oil in ice trays, and you can actually make olive oil basil ice cubes. And whenever you want some basil throughout the winter, you can just pop them out and cook with them. It's really fantastic. And then freezing fruits, you want to wash and sort them. Delicate fruits, as well. And then some things, so I've just gotten into banana ice cream, which is basically just freezing bananas and then blending them. It can add some nut butters and different toppings, but it tastes like just frozen bananas blended themselves taste like vanilla ice cream. It's crazy. And it's still got a lot of sugar, but other than that, it's pretty healthy for you. So I definitely recommend trying it. I'll add like almond butter. I'll blend it with some, pecans, and make it really creamy, some oat milk and stuff. It's so good. Definitely, I would recommend spending some time. But the problem is the bananas will start to brown in the freezer. So experimenting with adding, like ascorbic acid or like basically vitamin C. Or lemon juice or things like that. You can get all that, vitamin C powder from a grocery store, and then just adding that, and it actually preserves the banana, so it'll keep them from browning in your freezer. It's pretty awesome. Definitely eat some frozen banana ice cream. It's amazing. Dehydration is another way. So you're just basically removing the water that bacteria needs to survive, that bacteria that's going to break things down, so it preserves things. We used to make these solar dehydrators. You can make really generic ones out of aluminum foil, or you can make really nice wooden ones. But that was really fun, especially if you belong to a garden. We used to like make like fruit roll-ups and stuff, you know, with the strawberries at our garden. Yeah, so you got sun drying, just leaving it out in the sun, like sun-dried tomatoes. Air drying, where you just like, you know, you hang your herbs and let it just dry out. Oven drying, or you know, dehydrating, and you actually put in the oven. And if you're really into it, you know, I definitely recommend buying some of these like dehydrator, you know. But yeah, really great stuff. Yeah, I want to get to the yeah, we're going to move a little bit quickly, so there's a video at the end I want to about canning. But yeah, we talked a little bit about this: preserving herbs, cutting herbs, and hanging them upside down, air drying them, and then keeping them in sealed containers, or infusing them with olive oil, or freezing them in ice cubes. All works really great. Pickling and fermenting. Definitely recommend, if you're pickling and especially fermenting things, follow the recipes, especially if you're new to it. You know, just so yeah, there's a lot of time that's gone into these recipes, and there's a little bit of safety factors as well. Like you want to use vinegar that has at least 5% acidity. So it basically what it does is it preserves this stuff, you know, and it keeps, you know, the bacteria from breaking it down. Definitely follow, and so, you know, pickling is using vinegar, and then fermenting is using like a brine, like a saltwater brine. So it's more salty as well. And here's a really great recipe for fermented pickle. Basically, yeah, you know, getting pickles, you know, freezing them for a second, you know, throw them in some ice water to kind of crisp them up a little bit, throwing them in a jar, filling them up with salt water brine to the top, and then getting like you know, like a rock, or a bag, some kind of plastic bag or something. You want to push everything under the water. You don't want to have anything popping out. So you push it down, and it's full of like, also, I forgot to mention, you can put dill and garlic and all different kinds of herbs. And then you let it, and you just kind of seal it. And it should have some bubbles and things once it, and then it's going to start the fermenting process. And if you seal it really tight, the idea is you want to have it so you don't tighten it all the way so the gas actually releases, but you can actually, you know, create more fizzy, you know, brine drinks and stuff if you seal it and then burp it every once in a while. But yeah, we have a whole fermenting class if you want to learn more about fermenting on the Doug Network. But I want to get to canning, because I'm going to show you a video for canning real quickly. But canning is a really great way to like preserve things for years. There's two different kinds of canning. There's a water bath where you actually you get this tray, and you just boil water. You fill up these jars full of you know, stuff that you want. Seal them tightly. You want to sanitize everything really well. You know, boil it for a certain amount of time, pull it out, let it cool down, and then the top should pop. And that shows that it's got a seal to it. And then it'll preserve forever. And if it doesn't pop, or if you messed up, you just got to eat. You just got to eat it in the next month. You know, and don't let it preserve it. And then there's pressure cookers that you can cook things like meats and stuff that are a little bit more risky, but it's a lot hotter. You cook it under pressure. I do know, like, the few people I know that have gotten injuries from canning, like basically, you know, spilling hot water on them and stuff. It always comes from pressure cookers because it's much hotter and stuff. So I would start out water bathing and then go to pressure cooking. But instead of reading the steps, actually, I'm just going to show the video, and I think this is going to be the last video for the class. This is Kathy Gunst from the Here and Now, the WBUR. She does a really quick canning 101 class or video.
Every September, without fail, I make up a huge batch of tomato sauce. So I have all these beautiful heirloom varieties of tomatoes that I grew. I have my own garlic, my own onions, and a whole collection of herbs straight from the garden. These are all going to get chopped up into a sauce that I roast. And what happens is that the high heat of the oven just breaks down the tomatoes, and you have like instant roasted sauce, and it's slightly caramelized and smoky. It's fantastic. One of the big myths about canning is that it's super complicated and you need a lot of special equipment, and none of that is true. Here's what you need. You need a big pot. This is my canning pot. It's just a big, huge pot filled with boiling water. This is the insert that comes with it. It's going to hold our jars. We're going to put this in later. We have clean canning jars. You can reuse them from year to year, but you need brand new lids and seals every year in order to make a tight seal. And we're going to talk about that in a little while. The really important thing with canning is that everything be sterilized and clean. You don't want any bacteria. So we take our jars and we put them right into the boiling water. You don't have to worry about the jars cracking or breaking because they're made to take high temperature. I got some smaller jelly jars here. Now these are the lids and the screw-on tops. And as I said, you need brand new ones every year. You don't have to buy new jars every year. You can reuse them. And the lids need to be sterilized as well. So we're going to pop those right in here. Cover them up, let them boil for 3 to 5 minutes also. Just leave it alone and let it sterilize. Jars have been boiling for 5 minutes. You'll see I have a pair of long tongs and they have nice rubber on the end so they stick. You know, you don't drop things as easily. Just want to take the lids out. You don't want to touch anything. Once it's been sterilized, you'll have to touch the lids later, but you just want to let them dry off. And we're going to pick up the jars and drain them. You want to be really careful. This is really hot boiling water. And we'll just line them up and let them dry. So these are super sterilized. They've been through the dishwasher and now they've been in boiling hot water. Something to always keep in mind when you're canning is you don't want to be putting cold sauce or jams into hot jars. You want the sauce to be warm. So we're going to just put that in. You never want to fill it all the way, 3/4, because it's going to go back into the heat and it's going to expand. Let's give that a little juice. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take our towel and we're not going to touch the rim. We're just going to clean it off because we don't want any sauce there because that can create bacteria. Take a clean lid, put it in, put that on. Seal it up really tight. You see there's still some space there. And we'll keep going. So we have our jars. They're been sterilized. They've been filled with the hot sauce. The lids are on. They're sterilized. The top's been screwed on. I'm just going to double check that. And we're ready to process them. Our water's boiling. Again, you want to be really, really careful. This is incredibly hot. I have my rack there. Just going to lower those onto the rack. Put one in the middle. That works out perfectly. And now we're going to gently lower them into the water. You want them to be completely submerged in the boiling water. We're going to cover it and we're going to process them for 30 minutes. And we'll let them cool off. I'm going to lift them out. One of the really good signs that I see is that none of the lids are buckling. And what I mean is that sometimes when they haven't sealed properly, if there's air trapped there, they'll kind of look like a little wave and you'll see a buckle. We don't have any of that. We have that really nice hollow sound and they all sound the same, and that's another good sign. I just want to show you, you don't have to worry about taking this off. This can come off, but this is where you're testing it. See that seal? We are good. So hopefully I've demystified the canning process for you. It's really simple. You just want to be super sterilized and super clean, and you won't have any problems. And you're going to have this gorgeous sauce or whatever it is you choose to can all winter long. So enjoy it. Don't be scared of it, and have fun. The other
All right. So we actually have a couple. We have Regina Anderson, the head of the Food Recovery Network, does every year she does a bunch of canning classes with us, and we recorded a couple of them. So she's got all kinds of fun recipes from mustards to sauces and different things like that. So definitely check out the Dog Network, our videos, if you want to learn more. And that's basically it. So here's a couple of really great books if you want to learn more about canning and food preservation and cooking and things like that. We have a couple of these in our tool library if you want to borrow them. And yeah, that's it. Thank you all so much. I'll stick around for a little bit, but thank you for making it to the last class. And yeah, hopefully we'll be doing more. I can't wait to start doing these classes in person again, but for now, yeah, I'll send an email when all the classes are up and recorded, and all the PowerPoints and stuff, and feel free to reach back out if you ever have any questions. I'll stick around if you have any other questions too. Hey, Deborah, how you been? Okay, I can't hear you.
I'm still muted. How do you get the recipes for tonight?
Oh, send me an email. I have there's a Google folder I shared with everybody that's got all the PowerPoints.
Yeah.
So you can get that. But if you can't find that, send me an email. I'll send that to you again.
That's all right. That would be great. Some of them sounded good.
Yeah.
I didn't know you could eat broccoli leaves. So you
Yeah.
have a 4-year-old. That's cool.
4-year-old and a 1-year-old.
Huh?
And a 1-year-old, a 4-year-old. And a 1-year-old.
Wow. See,
Yeah.
it's been a while.
Yeah. Since we created, it's been time's flying.
Wow. Well, get them on. It sounds like you're getting them full of all sorts of good good things.
They have my 1-year-old loves cherry tomatoes. It's so funny. But my 4-year-old, she just loves the strawberries and raspberries, and she's kind of
Wow. Who doesn't like strawberries and raspberries?
So our garden, I'm basically just growing, cherry tomatoes, strawberries, and raspberries, and then some.
Oh.
Herbs.
So do you have a house and a garden nowadays?
A little one, yeah.
Oh, cool. Well, I'm glad it's well. I'll send you an email because some of those recipes did sound good. I didn't even know. The one thing I didn't know is I know a lot of stuff, but broccoli leaves and stuff like that, and cabbage leaves. No idea.
In the produce giveaway last year, we would bunch them up like a normal collard bunch, and they're so good.
Because I like all kinds of greens, so I'll eat. Yeah.
They're like a sweeter version of collards. So.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you have the classes on the taped thing too, because I signed up and I couldn't go to a bunch of them because work kept doing committee meetings, like board committee meetings on Wednesday, and I'm like, I put this on my calendar as unavailable, but no.
Well, I mean, it's nice, like only 4 people showed up today, but I'm like, hey, we're which is still, I'd still be okay, but I'm like, I'm gonna record this and send this out to like 500 people, so.
Yeah.
So
that'll be nice.
Everyone, it's convenient, I guess.
Yeah, and hopefully I can volunteer for some of the projects over the summer. Get a little time.
Yeah.
I mean, I work at home. My boss is a little crazy. He's a nice guy, but he's got anxieties. But I'm like, I work at home. I can go out and do volunteers and shift my hours.
Yeah, let me know. 10 to 2.
So I'll send you an email for the recipes, but then I'll say I'd like to work on, like to do some of the volunteer farming.
Yeah, I'll send you some details.
Garden work.
We can use help for sure.
It's a beautiful garden season so far at Newark Street. So.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm gonna go.
All right. Yeah. Good seeing you. Take care.